All right, thanks for tuning in again here. Now we're going to talk about division with integers and dividing them. And you'll notice if you look at the screen, which you are, I hope, I have a fraction up there. And some of you might be thinking, I thought we were doing division. Well, I have news for you. Fractions are division problems. And most of the time in algebra, moving forward, you will see division problems written this way. You won't see them usually write it as 12 divided by 4. Okay, it's just not something you're going to see a lot of anymore. You'll see a little bit of it on Alex when you do some of these problems, and you'll see that later in a later video that they use the division sign. But for the most part, you should get comfortable with the fact that fractions are division problems, and a lot of times when you're doing a division problem, they just write it as a fraction. They're easier to convert and multiply and divide and work with other numbers, especially other fractions, decimals, things, rather than you just wind up having to convert it if it's written in that form. So they just write it immediately in this form most of the time. So anyway, the big thing I want to tell you about integer division is that the rules are the same as multiplication. So that kind of long, almost 10-minute video that you just got done watching, which I hoped you did watch, gave you a list of rules at the end of it that, basically said that depending on what you multiply together, right? You multiply these two together, you get a positive. If you do a positive times a negative, you get a negative. If you multiply negative times positive, you get a negative. And then if you multiply negative times a negative, you get a positive, right? And I told you that thing about, well, if the signs are the same, it's always going to be a positive result. And if they're different from each other, they'll be negative. And if you have more than two things that you're multiplying, basically you look to see if you have an even or an odd number of negative signs. And that will tell you whether or not your result is negative or positive. If it's odd, it will be negative. If it's even, it will be positive, because the even means you can make the pairs of negatives that will cancel each other out. So the rules for dividing they use the same thing. So like in this one here, we have a positive divided by a positive, right? And so positive divided by a positive is going to give you a positive. If you have a positive divided by a negative, you're going to get a negative. If you have if you have a negative divided by a positive, you're going to get a negative. And if you have a negative divided by a negative, you're going to get a negative answer. All right, so 12 divided by 4, 12 divided by 4 is 3. And you're dividing a positive by a positive, so that's going to give you positive. So you probably knew that already, but I'm just showing you in the context of this right here. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about really quick is you can write, like a lot of times when you're dividing a positive by a negative number, fractions, you'll see them written a bunch of ways. If somebody says negative 1/2, for example, and I've got another example up here, but I'll just walk you through this. If they say negative 1/2, a lot of times people will write it like this. They'll put the negative sign out, and then they put the 1/2 as kind of like one number like that. Another way of writing that is by saying it's negative 1/2. Because 1 divided by 2 is the same as 1 divided by 2 over here. And then but negative 1 divided by 2, it's going to give you the exact same answer. So this is another way of writing it. And a final way of writing it is 1/-2. So that fraction sign, or not the fraction sign, the negative sign can kind of move around and change positions and stuff, as long as there aren't more of them that are created. As long as you keep the number of them the same, they can sort of move. All right, so 12 divided by -4 is the same as going to be equivalent to -12 divided by 4, and it's also going to be equivalent to -12/4. So all you do is you do your 12 divided by 4, that gives you 3. You have a positive divided by a negative, in this first case right here, and that's going to give you a negative because you have an odd numbers and negatives, right? Same thing with this one, -12 divided by 4. Well, 12 divided by 4 is 3. Negative divided by a positive also gives you a negative answer. And on this one, you just do 12 divided by 4, 3, and then just apply that negative. So they're all going to give you kind of the same thing. All right, let's take a look at this. Negative 36 divided by 9, so just do 36 divided by 9 in your head. And then you say, okay, that's 4. And then you know that you have a negative divided by a positive, or the way I wrote it down earlier was like that. And we know that's going to give us a negative answer. So it would be negative. All right, so negative 4. Negative 4 divided by negative 2. Well, what do we got going on? Well, it's like a double negative, isn't it? So you've got, if I write this out, it's negative 4 divided by negative 2. Well, I know that in multiplication, when I have two negatives that are multiplying each other, they give me a positive result. And we just said that division is the same thing. It follows the same rules. So whatever I get, I'm going to get a positive answer. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. So you would get positive 2. So that's kind of basically how this whole thing works. All right? It's just, if you know your multiplication rules well, you should be able to do the division, and then understand that division is written generally as fractions. Fractions are division problems. And then just understanding also that negative sign can kind of move around a little bit when it's in the fraction. So a lot of new things you're seeing, and we're throwing a lot at you, but you got this.